This is the most realistic wilderness survival show I've seen. 10 contestants are dropped into the Arctic wilderness. The last one standing wins $500,000. There are no scripts or cameramen, just 10 tools provided by the show's crew. Contestants must endure loneliness and extreme weather, always on guard against attacks from grizzly bears, wolves, and moose. Contestant Nathan, a landowner without a farm, started gaining wilderness survival experience at 19. Now a skilled carpenter, designer, and biologist, his goal is to win the prize money to build a farm. When Nathan was dropped off, he immediately spotted a squirrel on a spruce tree and shot an arrow at it. Unfortunately, he missed, and the arrow got stuck in a branch. However, he quickly chopped down the tree with an axe and attempted to start a fire using a bow drill, a technique he preferred over using a flint, which takes up one of the tool slots. Despite his expertise, he couldn't get a fire started after the wind blew away his tinder. After struggling for another half hour, he gave up and focused on building a shelter using a tripod of small trees, a horizontal beam, and a waterproof tarp, crucial for defense against wild animals, especially during the moose mating season. That night, the stunning northern lights filled the sky. Nathan was awoken by nearby footsteps, and to his surprise, a moose actually approached him. However, he turned off the camera to sleep, inadvertently letting the $500,000 slip away. The next morning, Nathan continued with the bow drill using 2 new types of wood he found nearby. Hours of friction later, the fire still wouldn't start. Just then, the video cut out. When it resumed, the fire was burning, but unfortunately, the recording didn't capture the process due to the memory card filling up. The next contestant, Nikki, a survival guide and fisherwoman with 20 years of primitive living experience, once lived on an island with a friend for a year and a half, learning the essence of survival. Nikki, who has hunted 2 bears and a cougar, joined the show to prove her skills and hopefully win the $500,000. After being dropped off, she carried 60 pounds of filming equipment to find a suitable campsite. She quickly scouted the area, which would soon be covered by heavy snow. Lucky for her, she found some porcini mushrooms, but they were spoiled by rats, evidenced by the bite marks and droppings. Nikki carefully removed the contaminated parts, knowing that food is a fundamental part of wilderness survival. While gathering mushrooms, she heard a low growl and discovered a lynx staring at her. The lynx, perhaps deeming her a difficult target, turned and left. Nikki expressed regret that lynxes are protected. Otherwise, it would have made a fine meal. Knowing that lynxes and snow hares share a diet, she tried to follow the lynx but lost track of it soon after. Contestant Tim is a professional hunter. At 55, he believes his years of experience make him more likely to win this challenge. He prepared by gaining weight to store fat and immediately started hunting large animals on the second day. He understood the key points to winning and found footprints and animal trails indicating the presence of moose and black bears nearby. Tim decided to build a wall to block them, giving him time to attack. Just as he finished the wall, he heard a noise.
I just spooked the heck out of that. I was getting ready to throw this camera so I could draw my bow.
Contestant Barry, a self-defense coach from a hunting family, learned his ancestors' skills from childhood. He believes his ingrained survival skills are superior to those who trained specifically for the competition. Right after being dropped off and making a few remarks, he heard a helicopter. It turned out his hat was left on the plane, and the crew returned to deliver it.
I forgot something! A hat!
Showing great care. Near his camp, Barry found a squirrel. He set up a snare trap, commonly used for small animals. As he prepared a second trap, he found a squirrel right in front of him, enjoying breakfast in the sunlight. It appeared to have been killed by a headshot, giving Barry a sniper-like feeling. On day 4 of the survival challenge, Nathan checked the fishing nets he had set up in the lake the previous day. Seeing him pick up a stick, it was clear he had caught a fish.
That's food for a week! Easily, look how monstrous it is.
Unexpectedly large. Nathan dissected it on the spot, securing food for a week, giving him a great start. Tim, on the other hand, had not eaten in 4 days. He was tirelessly hunting large animals. Today, near his camp, he found a swampy area with many animal tracks, an ideal hunting spot. He decided to rest overnight and hunt in the morning. On his way back, Tim found a wild shovel, which contestants are allowed to use.
Chomp it down, that's what I do. Oh, no. Oh,
He was thrilled, but slipped and injured himself, leading to his withdrawal from the competition after a medical check confirmed a fracture. Tim was the first contestant eliminated this season, unable to use his strategy or fat reserves. By day 5, snow began falling, quickly covering the ground. Nathan had to brave the snowstorm to improve his shelter. Barry tried to go out, but nearly froze his hands after 15 minutes.
Come on, fish. Come on, fish. Oh, it's blowing it already.
Nikki had similar experiences, retreating from fishing due to the snow. Contestant Ray is a search and rescue dog trainer. He started hunting with a bow and arrow at 14 and knows animal habits well. He is skilled at making various types of traps. Ray believes his skills will help him survive longer in the challenge. Winning the $500,000 prize would allow him to move his family away from the city for a better life. Today, on his 6th day in the competition, Ray, who hasn't eaten, desperately needs a fish to satisfy his hunger. He believed he would find a fish so desperate to eat that it wouldn't miss any bait. Surprisingly, he was right.
Oh, I got a fish. Get it up. Ah.
Ray couldn't wait to eat it, but when he cut the fish open with his knife, he found it filled with parasites. He had to cook it thoroughly to avoid infection. The meat attracted a crow, so Ray gave it the fish's gills as a form of protection payment. The next contestant, Jordan, is often called the Chinese son-in-law. He lived with reindeer herders in Siberia for 5 years, learning many survival skills like fishing, hunting, and trap setting. Growing up on a farm, he's used to living alone and thinks leaving his family for a few months to win a large cash prize is worth it. It means more time with family later. On day 6, Jordan's shelter is shaping up. He even made a moose call during his free time. Today, he planned to check his traps, but found nothing. Knowing he's leaner than contestants with more body fat, Jordan realized he needs to store enough food before winter to survive. He intended to scout hunting spots, but found the area burnt by a wildfire, leaving only his campsite green. This challenging start was tough. Donnie should be familiar from a previous wilderness survival show. He's served in the military and survived around the world, now running a wilderness survival school. Despite his heart condition, which he calls the Widowmaker, he prefers to fight for his faith rather than wait passively at home. On day 6, Donnie's shelter, which offers excellent insulation, was nearly complete. He planned to add moss for extra warmth to withstand Arctic conditions. Once his shelter was set, Donnie needed to address food. He prepared to make a throwing stick, reportedly powerful enough to break a deer's leg.
That's a throw.
After careful crafting, it seemed well made, but its effectiveness was yet to be tested. The season's second female contestant, Michelle, grew up in a remote mountain village where hunting, fishing, and trapping were daily activities. She stated she wouldn't quit the challenge unless severely injured, as the $500,000 prize could significantly improve her family's life. Unfortunately, by day 7, Michelle hadn't had a decent meal. Despite her fishing skills, she hadn't even seen a fish scale after several days. Her only find was a broken oil drum, a prime wilderness survival item that could be turned into many useful tools. Michelle's idea was to turn it into a bobber for fishing. She first cut some branches to make a frame for the oil drum, which would prevent it from rolling in the water. Then she crafted the fishing hooks into lifelike bait, and finally tied them around the drum to launch it into the water. The scene shifts to Nikki. It's already noon, and she hasn't gotten up yet. Perhaps this conserves energy, especially since she's eaten nothing but mushrooms these past few days. After getting up, she gathered some branches to make a mouse trap, placing it where she previously picked mushrooms. Seeing how she handled the knife, something seemed off. Before anyone could speak, she accidentally cut her hand. Thankfully, the crew had an emergency medical kit, and Nikki quickly used gauze to stop the bleeding. The wound was quite deep. In the cold wilderness, not only are wounds slow to heal, but they are also prone to infection. Improper care could lead to sepsis. The camera then turns to Donnie. To prepare for the Arctic winter, he was gathering dry wood daily. Having had no luck fishing recently, he decided to go hunting with his bow and arrows. He didn't get far before sitting down, adopting a wait-and-see approach. After an unknown wait, He heard a noise nearby, grabbed his bow and arrows, and rushed towards it. Donnie fired into the bushes, and by his expression, he seemed to have hit his target. After starving for 7 days, Donnie finally caught some food. Simple preparations later, the muskrat was turned into a barbecue. There was no cumin or spice mix, since hunger is the best seasoning. Though the meat was only enough to fill the gaps between his teeth, it gave Donnie hope of winning. Feeling energized after eating, he encountered problems 2 hours later. His stomach began to hurt. Donnie turned off the camera to address the issue, realizing it was serious. The meat likely contained parasites, causing dysentery and intestinal cramps. It was going to be a tough night. Back to Nikki, her hand was beginning to heal. With a new bandage, she continued to work. Chopping trees with one hand wasn't easy, but for survival, she couldn't stop. On the 8th day, just before dawn, the QE inside Donnie became overwhelming, leading to delirium. Not only was his stomach empty, but his body fluids were also depleted. Barely making it to the next morning, his condition worsened, causing chest pain after dry heaving, likely from dehydration thickening his blood, triggering his heart condition. After a fierce internal struggle, Donnie finally collapsed and couldn't continue. After making the call to quit, although he didn't last until the end, he had given it his all, and in his child's eyes, he was the best. The challenge had only reached day 8, and out of 10 contestants, only 8 remained. To win $500,000, Wiia licked a large tree because birch sap contains various nutrients and could relieve her extreme hunger and thirst. Today was her 9th day in the wilderness, and her shelter still needed to be reinforced and upgraded before the Arctic winter set in. As the 3rd female contestant this season, her wilderness survival skills were extensive. Not only familiar with various edible wild plants, but fishing, hunting, and setting traps were also within her capabilities. The game in her hands was both food and clothing. Joining the Wilderness Survival Challenge was to prove that even a small woman can be fierce and formidable. Currently, there are only a few hours of daylight in the Arctic. Most of the time is spent inside shelters. Therefore, she pays extra attention to safety and warmth. She not only debarked the tree trunks to prevent fires, but also laid a layer of pine branches on the outside to insulate against rain and snow. Finally, she customized a small door for the shelter. With that, the quaint cabin was completed. Now, she can focus on gathering and hunting. Contestant Jordan is quite astonishing. He is probably the wealthiest contestant right now. He complained about the scarcity of resources at his camp. Yet just 2 days after setting traps, he enjoyed a great harvest, catching 4 plump rabbits. There was also an unexpected gain while processing the food, which felt rather cruel. He not only took the baby rabbits' food but also turned them into delicious rabbit heads. Life is quite comfortable for him that he even thought about bringing his family to live there. On the 10th day of the challenge, Nathan said he had a wonderful dream overnight. He dreamed of pulling a huge black bull out of his fishing net. He took it as a sign that today's catch would be good. He hurried to the lakeside and, to his surprise, caught a large fatty fish, about the same size as the last one. Nathan quickly pulled it out and noticed the female fish had a large belly, likely full of roe. Using his years of fishing experience and skilled technique, he extracted all the roe in no time. This is a luxury ingredient in wilderness survival, and he ate the raw roe on the spot. The bravery of this season's contestants is notable as they all go all out to win the $500,000 prize. The large roe can be used as bait, and the rest taken back to camp for stewing and grilling, truly making the most of what they have. However, the risks of eating raw roe soon became apparent. Nathan returned to the shelter feeling dizzy and weak. Instead of feasting on meat and soup, he now just wanted to lie down and sleep. A few hours later, he felt turmoil inside and couldn't help but rush outside to vomit violently. After a thorough purge, he felt completely drained, even vomiting blood. He realized the roe might not have been fresh. With some strength left, he hurried back to lie down in the shelter. The last person infected by parasites had already been carried away. Could Nathan be following in his footsteps? The camera then moves to Ray, who, after failing to catch fish, had to rely on berries to stave off hunger. However, this meager food was not enough to sustain him. So, he set his sights on a neighboring squirrel. Considering the squirrel's agile movements, Ray prepared to make a scissor-type trap. Although he had come to see the squirrel as a companion over the days, for the sake of filling his stomach and winning the $500,000 prize, Ray thought it was not too much to eat it in an emergency. Once the preparation was ready, Ray set the trap and waited for the squirrel to spring it. As soon as the squirrel stepped on the mechanism, the scissors would tightly clamp around it. On the 11th day of the challenge, Barry, who had previously killed a squirrel with a single arrow, did not focus on upgrading and reinforcing his shelter. Instead, he was earnestly teaching a girl fighting skills. Today, he prepared to explore a new area in search of game. He had just left the camp when he made a new discovery. From his expression, I thought he had found a moose, but it turned out to be several broken pots. Barry, treating them like treasures, picked them all up. He planned to turn these pots into fish-shaped lures. After some hammering, the lures were made and looked quite convincing. Barry immediately went to the lakeside to check his results, hopeful after 9 days without animal protein. Surprisingly, his luck was excellent, and he quickly caught a fish. Just as days' worth of food was within reach, he didn't expect the leader line to be cut and to lose the fish hook. Barry's mood instantly exploded like popcorn. Next up is the season's last contestant, Brady, a former instructor at the American Special Training Academy, skilled in survival, evasion, resistance, and escape, and responsible for training new recruits. A true professional, he entered the competition simply to win the prize money and improve his life. His shelter was already built, and he was focusing on gathering food. After collecting berries, he went into the jungle to hunt and unexpectedly found a musk deer skeleton. Although the meat was eaten by wolves, the bones were still valuable, especially the skull, which he hung as a totem at his shelter, exuding absolute dominance. He made tools from the remaining bones. Brady cut a piece of cloth, found a musk deer bone, and started working with a roll of wire. Without a bow and arrow, he struggled to hunt large animals, relying on fishing and traps for food. After a busy period, he created various biomimetic baits and hurried to the lakeside to test his results. Surprisingly, he caught a fish quickly, enough to feed him for several days. The resources here were truly excellent.
Yeah, absolutely beautiful. Dinner, maybe some breakfast.
On day 13 of the survival challenge, Ray, unable to catch fish, was determined to eat the neighboring squirrel. Today, he checked his traps with a bow and arrow, found the mechanism stuck, but unexpectedly, the squirrel appeared. Ray mercilessly shot it.
And I put him out of his misery. It's what's for dinner.
And soon the squirrel was stewed. At that moment, Ray felt great. Not long after eating the squirrel, he felt deeply guilty and remorseful, crying in front of the camera, perhaps shedding crocodile tears. Nathan, having eaten raw fish roe, hadn't left his shelter due to vomiting, and it seemed he might be the next to quit. However, he managed to persist. The camera then moved to Michelle, who had been float fishing. Sadly, she had no catch yet, frustrating her after 12 days on a vegetarian diet. She caught a partridge by trap, a sudden delight that excited her, and she dove into immersive wilderness survival, returning to her shelter to eat. After eating, she lamented her misfortune when her shelter caught fire. Other contestants survived on wild vegetables and berries, but Jordan, finding rabbit meat too lean and unpalatable, had a different idea when a moose visited his camp last night. He took his bow and arrows and patrolled near the camp, finding moose tracks in a mud pit close to his shelter. Thinking of the $500,000 prize so close, Jordan smiled smugly, prepared to set up an alarm system nearby for the next encounter. The survival challenge has reached day 14, with 8 contestants remaining. Last night, Michelle got overly excited while eating chicken, causing the moss on the fireplace to catch fire. Luckily, it was still early in the challenge, and the fire was quickly controlled. Learning from this, she chopped new logs to rebuild and sealed the gaps with clay for both warmth and safety. Unfortunately, she overlooked the oil drum she found. If transformed into a fireplace, it could have been a safe and functional stove. The camera then moved to Nikki, who had previously set several mouse traps. Early this morning, she came to check on her catch. The first trap was not triggered, but the second one seemed successful. With high hopes, Nikki lifted the stone cover to find a mouse squashed flat. Yet she was still overjoyed and grateful, as this was her first meat meal in half a month. She quickly made it into a skewer, pairing it with blueberries for a side. The small meal was tasty, but not enough to satisfy her hunger. Nikki aimed to catch a larger animal, so she went hunting with her bow and arrows. Her luck was good today, spotting a large squirrel and shooting it down. Although the contestants are skilled archers, Nikki accidentally injured herself with her own arrow while returning to camp, a mishap following a recent cut. Despite the deep wound, she swiftly bandaged it and continued, proving to be this season's most entertaining contestant. Meanwhile, Jordan was mimicking the mating call of a female deer to attract a moose, hoping to win the $500,000 prize. Shortly after he started, an alarm near the camp went off. He rushed out barefoot and pantsless, carefully scouting the area. He found a moose by a pond and shot at it with his bow, but missed. With only one arrow brought in haste, he could only watch as the moose walked away. He believed he could still lure it back. On day 16, Ray was once again after a squirrel, which narrowly escaped. Reflecting on having eaten only a fish and a squirrel in half a month, Ray felt dejected. To distract himself, he began to upgrade and fortify his shelter with pine branches inside and moss outside, constructing a warm air raid shelter that could withstand the Arctic cold, but could potentially collapse under heavy snow. After completing his shelter, Ray decided to go fishing. As food was his most pressing need. Despite his efforts, his luck was poor today with no catch, which he attributed to the spawning season as the fish were protecting their eggs. Ultimately, he resorted to picking berries to stave off hunger. This setback nearly broke him, but the thought of a regular 9-to-5 job and the freedom the prize money could bring kept him going. The camera shifts to Wiia. Her situation is not much better. Halfway through the competition, she has yet to eat meat. Most of her screen time shows her roasting socks, which might be her way of satisfying hunger through smell. After roasting, she lies down to pick and eat berries. Her vegetarian diet has left her craving meat, so she takes her bow and arrows in search of game. Surprisingly, she finds something valuable, a moose antler recently shed, alongside chewed branches, a sure sign of a nearby moose. If she could hunt it down, the $500,000 prize would be hers. Wiia starts a thorough search, but instead finds a grouse. Without hesitation, she shoots it. It seemed to have flown away, but feathers and blood on the arrow suggest it didn't go far. After searching, Wiia finds it, holds it in her arms, and can't help but drool with emotion. After days of wild vegetables and berries, she finally gets to eat meat. Laughing with relief, she quickly plucks and cooks the grouse into a hearty soup, feeling immensely satisfied, as if reaching a life's peak. It's day 19, and Ray is still surviving on berries, visibly thinner. Today, he gears up for hunting again, but soon starts pondering life. Before the competition, he thought he could survive well on his skills, but now sees no hope. After much hesitation, Ray calls on a satellite phone. His parting words are simple. He's quitting because he can't find enough to eat. Surviving 19 days on just one fish and a squirrel is already impressive. The camera then turns to Jordan, who tries fishing by the lake but catches nothing, feeling foolish just standing there. He decides to focus on traps and hunting instead. Still fixated on a missed moose opportunity, he devises a new strategy involving fences to corral and direct moose to a certain area, making them easier to handle. After explaining, Jordan grabs an axe and starts building, sharing tree-cutting tips along the way. After some hard work, he quickly encloses an area. By nightfall, everything is set. The next morning, as Jordan is about to move his traps, he is shocked to see a moose. Jordan shoots at a moose. Following the blood trail, he soon finds frothy blood, indicating a lung shot. He just needs to wait it out. After much effort, he finds the moose. Cautiously, he approaches. The injured moose is highly aggressive, and approaching rashly could provoke a counterattack. A lung-shot moose will die within 6 hours. The safest method is to wait patiently and keep chanting spells silently. 3 hours later, the moose succumbs after several desperate struggles. Jordan carefully checks the situation.
Yeah!
With continued caution and food protection, the $500,000 prize seems assured. Jordan was busy until after 10 p.m., transporting meat back to camp on the 20th day of the survival challenge. Brady, imagining the taste of elk, became unbearably hungry and went out to forage. He found no food, only elk droppings, which were a good sign for others, but useless to him, as he was the only one without a bow and arrow. Brady believed the contest was about enduring hunger since catching big game was as likely as winning the lottery. Thus he focused on trapping and fishing, excelling at the latter and soon catching a large fish, which he loudly celebrated. Although the fish paled in comparison to Jordan's elk, it was enough to keep him competitive. Back at camp, Brady boasted about his catch, while Jordan, the wealthiest contestant, worried about storing his deer meat. The trees near his camp were covered with meat, and he had built a storage rack, but there was still no room for 800 pounds of meat. The local temperature was inadequate for refrigeration, so the best preservation method was smoking the meat. However, sleeping in such a shelter attracted other predators. Concerned, Jordan covered the meat with pine branches at around 10 p.m., knowing bears could smell meat from 30 kilometers away, forcing him to sleep with one eye open. Meanwhile, Barry, driven mad by hunger after eating only blueberries, screamed in agony at midnight due to a leg cramp caused by malnutrition. He endured until morning, then boiled water to regain strength, realizing his body was warning him. He planned to use a stick to gather food after playing a song to boost his morale. On the 22nd day, Nathan's camp was covered in snow, and he planned to repair his shelter, but changed his plans after finding wolverine tracks in the snow. Following the tracks for about 8 kilometers, he lost them to snowfall and realized he needed to return to camp quickly to avoid getting lost. Exhausted and having wasted energy, Nathan faced a worsening survival environment. Jordan enjoyed char-grilled elk meat, turning the challenge into a vacation. As long as the meat stayed fresh and bears stayed away, winning seemed likely. Wiia, having eaten grass for over 20 days, was thrilled when a rabbit fell into her trap.
Oh my God, I got a rabbit.
After thanking the heavens, she prepared the rabbit and even showcased her craft skills by cutting the fur into strips, tying them to a tree, and twisting them into a plush rope. The camera shifts to Nikki. Today is her 45th birthday, unexpectedly celebrated in the Arctic wilderness. She lights some club moss, makes a wish, and then exits her shelter to check the traps. After more than 20 days in the competition, apart from catching a rat, she hasn't had a decent meal. She is hopeful for today's traps, but after checking several, she finds nothing. Just when she loses hope, the last trap surprises her with a live rabbit. Nikki joyously embraces it, tears of gratitude streaming down her face. Nikki then enjoys a feast, starting with blueberry and rabbit heart stew as an appetizer, a delicious mix of flavors. She licks the pot clean, thoroughly satisfied. The main course is roasted rabbit legs, making her 45th birthday celebration a complete success. After the meal, Nikki plans to sleep well, but is awakened at midnight by roaring outside. Possibly attracted by the rabbit's scent, an unwelcome visitor lurks. Nikki cautiously looks outside but sees nothing. She endures the long night and finds footprints in the snow the next morning, likely from a wolf or a bobcat. On Barry's 28th day alone in the wilderness, he checks nearby traps and finds a rabbit that had been caught for a while. Starving, he quickly skins it and prepares a meat stew in his ground pot. After a long and anxious wait, he devours the rabbit kidneys, feeling incredibly satisfied. This rabbit feast fills him with strength, and he no longer worries about nighttime leg cramps. As he shares his plans, the scene suddenly freezes. He hears noises outside, sounding like a black bear searching for food. Barry quickly fires a bear banger into the sky, successfully scaring the bear away. Relieved, he remarks that he would have shot it with an arrow if it had come closer. After surviving the long night, Barry is not intimidated by the bear and contemplates hunting one. He plans to bury the skin under a rock with a can of stones on top, which would alert him via a trigger mechanism to attack the digging bear. The scene shifts to Brady, who has been living comfortably. In addition to the big fish he caught days ago, he finds a skillet and a solid wood chair, making his fish fry incredibly enjoyable. The taste reminds him of his wife, stirring a sudden longing for his family. Wiia's situation is different. Although she hasn't eaten much these days, she has been tirelessly working to survive longer. especially with the harsh Arctic winter approaching. She plans to enhance her wooden walls into a double-structured shelter, filling the cavity with moss and spruce branches for insulation. Wiia works until midnight to finish the shelter, which she proudly shows off at dawn. Her creation is not only aesthetically pleasing, but also warm, likely the strongest luxury home this season, as long as it doesn't catch fire during the winter. Day 29 of the challenge. Contestant Nathan also got too cold, so he bought a solid wood bed. After setting it up, he went to the lake to check his fishing nets. Unexpectedly, he caught a big fat fish today. Nathan was so excited he got goosebumps. Every time he checks the nets, he catches a big fish. If Jordan hasn't hunted a moose, he would be the richest contestant right now. The fish caught today weighs at least 3 kilos. With the smoked fish stored in the shelter, he won't go hungry this week. If things keep going like this, he still has a chance to win the $500,000. Nathan has already planned how to spend the money. He dreams of eating roasted fish. Life would be very comfortable. Michelle would definitely be devastated to know, because she hasn't had protein in 7 days. Early in the morning, she came to the lake to check the fishing floats, but the much-anticipated device not only failed to catch anything, it also broke down completely. This was a blow for Michelle, who claims to be a fishing master. Actually, the resources here are not bad. It's just that Michelle hasn't utilized them well. Especially the oil drum, which is so versatile. She made the least useful thing with it. Now she can only hope for the traps. But after checking, there was still no catch. Anxious and malnourished, Michelle felt dizzy and just sat down on the ground. She started crying out of frustration. The camera then moved to Nikki. Recently, she hasn't been very active. Just her hands cracking from the cold. She made a pot of pine needle tea to soak her fingers. It contains antiseptic and antibacterial agents, helping her fingers recover quickly. After washing her hands, she added a squirrel. She made a nutritious dinner. Now, Nikki not only has meat, but also stores vegetables like mushrooms and berries. Her life is getting better and better. Although she was covered in cuts a few days ago, her wounds have almost healed, just as Nikki felt relieved. Unexpectedly, a new accident occurred. A fire started. It quickly spread to the roof. Nikki bravely ran outside to save what she could, but was driven back by the flames while trying to remove burning logs by hand. Nikki truly adds drama to the show. What is supposed to be a harsh survival show turned out to have comedic moments. First, she cut her hand. Then she stabbed her leg. And now she nearly turned herself into barbecue. With Nikki's half-cooked hands, the show's crew cannot let her suffer. Although Nikki's house was burned, her spirit remains optimistic. After all, this survival challenge is worth $1 million. The house can be repaired, and the challenge continued. Other contestants try to avoid mistakes, but Nikki hasn't made any specific improvements. She just replaced the charred logs. Can this really prevent another fire? What mistakes do you think Nikki will make next? Feel free to leave your comments below.